Who is Naomi in the Bible? Naomi fully experienced the pain of loss, and yet she continued in her faith, seemingly acknowledging God's sovereignty and willingly submitting to His will. Her trust in His provision bore fruit, and both Naomi and Ruth were well provided for. Naomi and Ruth are a wonderful testament to the beauty of a healthy mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationship. Unlike so many families today, both women acted out of love rather than jealousy. They demonstrate that love goes deeper than blood or nationality. It unifies across generations and cultures. Finally, it brings healing where there is brokenness. Naomi and Ruth's love for one another was inspiring, and yet only a shadow of the love that was to come from Jesus. What does Naomi's story teach us about faith? There are many lessons to learn from the story of Naomi. Here are 3. 1. God writes our stories. If Naomi had held the pen by which her story would be written, it would have ended as a tragedy. The title of the book would be something like The Painful End of Mara. She believed that her life was over. All her decisions, or more so her husband's decisions, led them to this bitter place. And it ended in death and no hope. She hadn't even considered a kinsman redeemer. In her mind, her story was over. We can make similar assumptions about our life. We can either cut God's power to redeem short, or even pridefully assume that if anything positive happens, it will come from our own hands. The story of Naomi reminds us that if God wants her to be called Naomi instead of Mara, He will certainly write her story so that it is not one which ends in bitterness but in blessing. 2. He restores the years the locusts have eaten. That phrase comes from Joel 2 verse 25. The people had experienced great famine and locusts had eaten so much of their land. Naomi had a similar experience. Not only did she experience the pain of famine but also the death of her loved ones. Yet, we see that by the end of the story, God had blessed Naomi and gave her restoration. It's not that anyone could ever fully replace the things she has lost, not in a one-to-one fashion. But somehow through God's kindness, even those lost years are restored by joy. 3. His plan to redeem will not be stopped. The story of Ruth and Boaz is a story about the improbable ways which King David came to be. But even more than that, it is a story about the improbable ways in which King Jesus came to be. Had this story not happened, there would be no King David and there would not have been the birth of Jesus as a descendant of David. There have been many times in history when it has seemed like God's plan of redemption was on its last breath. But God is faithful to His story. He always works out redemption. This is great news for us. God plans to redeem, and nothing will stop His plan.